There's a moment most men never notice. Not because it's hidden, but because it doesn't look like anything important. No dramatic gesture, no obvious signal, no clear invitation. Just a slight shift, almost invisible. And yet, in that shift, everything is revealed. Right now, somewhere in the world, a woman is sitting across from a man talking about something completely ordinary. Maybe her day, maybe something random, maybe nothing that matters. But underneath that surface, something else is happening. Something far more honest. Because while her words stay neutral, her body doesn't. And that's where the truth lives. Let me ask you something. How many times have you walked away from an interaction, replaying it in your mind later, wondering if there was something there, a look you didn't fully understand, a moment that felt different but you couldn't explain why, and days later, it hits you. Too late. You missed it. Not because you weren't interesting, not because you lacked confidence, but because you weren't seeing what was right in front of you, because no one ever taught you how. The reality is simple and uncomfortable. Attraction doesn't always speak in words. In fact, most of the time it doesn't. It moves through something quieter, something automatic, something the conscious mind doesn't fully control. And that's why it's so easy to miss, because you're listening when you should be observing. The human body has a flaw. It cannot hide intention completely. You can filter your words, you can control your tone, you can pretend indifference. But your body, it leaks the truth. Not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. And once you understand how that truth appears, you start seeing interactions differently. Not as random conversations, but as layered exchanges happening on two levels at once. One spoken, one revealed. Most people never cross into that second layer. They stay at the surface, reacting to what's said, missing what's shown. But there's a pattern. There's always a pattern. Attraction doesn't appear once, then disappear. It repeats. It builds. It shows itself again and again in small, almost dismissible ways. And the difference between the man who understands and the one who doesn't is simple. One notices repetition. The other ignores it. There's a part of the human body that almost no one pays attention to, and yet it's one of the most revealing areas when it comes to unspoken interest. Not because it's obvious, but because it's vulnerable, and vulnerability is never displayed without a reason. Think about this for a second. The body is designed to protect itself, automatically, without thought. When you feel uncomfortable, you close off. Your posture tightens, your movements become controlled, your exposure decreases, everything turns inward. But when that changes, when something or someone creates a different internal response, the body does the opposite. It opens. Not consciously, but instinctively. And that opening is where everything begins. There's a subtle movement that happens in conversation, so subtle that if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it every time. A slight tilt. Not exaggerated, not theatrical, just enough to shift the angle, to expose a line that is normally protected. And here's the part most people don't understand. That area is one of the most sensitive and vulnerable parts of the human body. It guards what keeps you alive. From an evolutionary perspective, exposing it is not neutral behavior. It's not casual. It only happens under two conditions: comfort or attraction. And when both are present at the same time, the signal becomes stronger. But again, it's not about a single moment. Anyone can move once without meaning. Anyone can adjust their posture randomly. But patterns? Patterns don't lie. She might adjust her hair once, then a few minutes later, do it again, then again, without realizing it. Her hand returns to the same place, not because she's thinking about it, but because her body is responding to something. And that something is you. But here's where it gets interesting. Attraction doesn't always begin in the mind. In fact, often it doesn't. The body reacts first. The mind catches up later. Which means what you're seeing is sometimes ahead of what she's consciously aware of. That's why these signals feel inconsistent to most men, confusing, unclear. because they're trying to interpret them logically when they're not logical. They're biological. There's a difference. Logic explains. Biology reacts. And reaction is always faster, always more honest. There was a moment, not obvious at the time, but clear in hindsight. Sitting across from someone, conversation flowing normally, nothing intense, nothing remarkable, but later, replaying it mentally, something stood out. Not what was said, not how it was said, but what kept happening again and again without intention. A hand returning to the same place, a movement repeating itself. Subtle, automatic, unnoticed in the moment, but undeniable afterward. And that's the pattern most men miss, because they're waiting for something obvious, something clear, something they can label instantly. But attraction rarely announces itself like that. It whispers, it repeats, it builds quietly until it becomes impossible to ignore. But only if you're paying attention. And here's the deeper layer. These movements aren't just visual, they're sensory. That area of the body carries warmth, carries scent, carries presence in a way that operates below conscious awareness, which means when it's exposed, it's not just about what you see, it's about what you feel, even if you can't explain it. And that's why certain interactions stay with you longer than others, not because of what was said, but because of what was experienced. There's another detail most people overlook. When someone feels closed off, their movements become efficient, minimal, contained. But when openness is present, movements become softer, less controlled, more fluid, not exaggerated, but less restricted. And that shift is everything. Because restriction is defense, fluidity is comfort, and comfort, in the presence of someone specific, means something. But again, context matters. A single signal means nothing. 2 signals? Still uncertain. But when you start seeing repetition, when you start noticing patterns, that's when things change. Because patterns require consistency, and consistency reveals intention, even when the mind isn't aware of it yet. So the next time you find yourself in a conversation, don't just listen. Observe. Not intensely, not obsessively, but calmly, quietly. Because the truth is rarely loud. It doesn't need to be. It's already there. You just haven't been looking in the right place.
There is another layer to this, one that most people overlook completely. Because it doesn't live in what is shown, it lives in where attention settles. Not where she looks for a second, not where her eyes casually pass, but where they return, without effort, without awareness. Let me ask you something. When you're around someone you don't care about, what happens to your attention? It drifts. It scans the room. It looks for something more interesting, something more engaging. But when something pulls you in, when something captures you at a level deeper than logic, your attention behaves differently. It anchors. It keeps coming back, even when you try to move it elsewhere. And this is where most men misunderstand everything. They think attraction is about what is obvious, the smile, the laughter, the conversation. But those are surface reactions. The real signal is where her focus lives when she's not trying. You could be in a group of people, voices overlapping, energy shifting from one person to another, and yet there's a quiet detail happening beneath all of that. Her body might be angled one way, her words directed somewhere else, but her attention keeps returning to you. Not dramatically, not in a way that demands notice, but consistently. And consistency is never accidental. There's a difference between noticing someone and being pulled toward them. Noticing is brief, controlled, easily redirected. But being pulled, that's something else entirely. That's when the body begins to align itself in small, almost invisible ways. Not all at once, not in a single movement, but gradually, piece by piece. You might see it in how she positions herself, not directly in front of you at first, but slightly closer than necessary, then a little more, then again. Each adjustment so small it feels random, but it isn't, because the body always moves toward what it wants before the mind decides to admit it. There's also something else that happens when this kind of pull is present. The rhythm changes. Conversation has a rhythm, back and forth, predictable, structured. But when attraction enters the space, that rhythm shifts. Pauses become longer. Silences feel different. Not empty, but charged. And this is where most men fail without realizing it. They panic in the pause. They rush to fill it. They think silence means something went wrong. But in reality, that silence is where everything is happening. Because when two people are just talking, silence feels awkward. But when something deeper is present, silence feels heavy, full, almost like something is about to happen, but hasn't yet. And that almost is where attraction lives. She might hold eye contact a second longer than necessary, not long enough to be obvious, but long enough to feel. And then she looks away, not abruptly, not dismissively, but slowly, as if she's aware of something and choosing not to let it fully show. And then, a few moments later, it happens again. That repetition is everything. Because attraction is not a single moment. It's a pattern of moments, a sequence, a buildup. And the body follows that buildup naturally. There's also a shift in how she responds to you. Not just what she says, but how quickly she responds. When someone is disengaged, responses are delayed, minimal, effortless in the wrong way. But when interest is present, there's a subtle eagerness, not overwhelming, not obvious, but noticeable if you're paying attention. She responds just a little faster, just a little more fully, adds something extra even when she doesn't have to. And then there's the tone. Tone reveals more than words ever could, because tone is harder to control, harder to fake. It carries emotion in a way that language cannot hide. You might notice a softness, a slight shift in energy when she speaks to you, compared to when she speaks to others. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, but different. And that difference is where the truth hides. But again, none of this exists in isolation. That's the mistake most people make. They look for one sign, one confirmation, one clear answer. But attraction doesn't work like that. It builds in layers, signals stacking on top of each other, each one subtle on its own, but together, undeniable. And when you start seeing multiple layers at once, that's when the picture becomes clear. Her attention returns to you. Her body subtly aligns toward you. Her responses carry a different energy. Her presence shifts in ways she may not even realize. And here's where it gets deeper. Because at a certain point, it's no longer about what she's doing. It's about what stops happening. Barriers begin to disappear. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. She becomes less guarded, less controlled, more natural, more open. Not in a way that feels forced, but in a way that feels effortless. And effortlessness is one of the strongest indicators of genuine attraction. Because when something is real, it doesn't need to be managed constantly. It flows. But this is also where things become fragile. Because this stage can easily collapse. Not because the attraction disappears, but because the moment is mishandled. Most men think they need to do something here, say something impressive, make something happen. But the truth is, the moment is already happening, and interference is what breaks it. Because attraction at this level is not about action. It's about alignment, being in sync with what's already there. And sync is not forced. It's felt. There's a natural pacing to it, a progression that doesn't need to be rushed. And the moment you try to accelerate it unnaturally, the balance shifts. She feels it, even if she can't explain it. Because again, this isn't logical, it's instinctive. An instinct responds to energy, not words. That's why some interactions feel effortless, while others feel forced, even if the words are the same. Because beneath the surface, something is either aligned or it isn't. And alignment cannot be faked for long. At some point, it either holds or it breaks. And when it holds,
something interesting happens. The space between you changes. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone else would notice, but you feel it. A slight reduction in distance, a subtle leaning in, an unconscious adjustment that brings you closer without either of you making a deliberate move. And this is where the difference becomes undeniable, because proximity is never random. We move closer to what we like. We create space from what we don't. It's automatic. And when that distance closes, even slightly, it carries meaning. But again, it's not about one movement. It's about repetition, consistency, pattern. Because one moment can lie, but patterns never do. And when you start seeing these patterns clearly, something shifts inside you, not in how you act, but in how you perceive. Interactions stop feeling confusing, uncertain, ambiguous, because you're no longer relying on words alone. You're reading the full picture. And once you see that picture, you can't unsee it, because it was always there. You just weren't trained to recognize it. Until now.
There is a point where everything becomes quiet. Not on the outside, but inside you. No more overthinking. No more trying to interpret every detail. No more searching for confirmation. Just a stillness. And in that stillness, something becomes clear. You stop looking for signs, and you start feeling direction. Because at a certain level, attraction is no longer something you analyze. It's something you recognize instantly. Not through logic, but through presence. You feel when the energy shifts. You feel when the moment holds. You feel when something is about to move forward, or when it's about to disappear. And this sensitivity, this awareness, is what separates hesitation from certainty. Because the truth is, the moment never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with a clear signal, or a perfect line, or an obvious invitation. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly, a slight pause that lingers longer than usual, a look that doesn't break as quickly, a closeness that wasn't there before. And in that moment, there's a decision. Not a loud one, not even a conscious one, but a shift. Forward or nothing. Most people miss it, not because they don't see it, but because they don't trust it. They second guess, they hesitate, they step back into their mind when they should remain in the moment. And hesitation kills more connections than rejection ever will, because rejection is clear, it closes the door, but hesitation leaves it half open until it slowly disappears on its own. And by the time you realize what happened, it's already gone. That's why so many interactions feel like almost something real, almost something meaningful, almost something that could have become more, but almost never becomes anything, because it requires one thing most people avoid: presence under pressure, the ability to stay in the moment when the moment becomes intense, not intense in a dramatic way, but in a subtle, internal way, when the silence feels heavier, when the eye contact feels deeper, when the space between you feels different. That's pressure, not external, but internal. And most people escape it. They laugh it off. They change the topic. They break the moment because it feels unfamiliar. But unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong. It often means real. There's a natural progression to connection, not forced, not calculated, but felt. It moves in small steps, never in jumps, and each step depends on one thing: whether you stay present long enough to take it. You don't create the moment, you don't force it into existence, you notice it and you meet it, that's all. But even that is something most people struggle with, because meeting the moment requires trust, not in her, but in yourself. Trust that what you're feeling is real, trust that you don't need to rush, trust that you don't need to hold back. Just respond, in alignment with what's already happening. There's a difference between forcing something forward and allowing it to unfold. Forcing feels heavy, it disrupts the flow, it creates resistance. But allowing feels natural, effortless, like the next step was always going to happen anyway. And that's where true confidence exists. not in bold moves, not in exaggerated actions, but in subtle alignment, matching the energy without overstepping it, moving forward without breaking the rhythm, because rhythm is everything. Every interaction has one, a pace, a flow, a timing that cannot be rushed without consequences. And when you learn to feel that rhythm instead of thinking about it, everything changes. You stop trying to be impressive. You stop trying to say the perfect thing, because you realize none of that is what moves the moment forward. What moves it forward is awareness, real-time awareness, seeing what's happening as it's happening, and responding without delay, not rushed, but not delayed, just in time. Timing is invisible. You can't measure it, you can't calculate it, but you feel when it's right, and you feel when it's missed. There's always a window, small, subtle, easy to overlook, but powerful. And that window doesn't stay open forever. It appears, holds for a moment, and then fades, not dramatically, not obviously, but quietly. And once it fades, it rarely returns in the same way. That's why awareness matters. Not just understanding signals, but recognizing the moment when those signals align. Because when everything comes together, attention, body language, energy, presence, there's a shift, a clear one. And in that shift, something either moves forward or stays exactly where it is. There is no middle, no later, no next time, only now. And that's what most people struggle to accept. They think there will always be another opportunity, another chance to respond differently, another moment to act. But moments don't repeat, they evolve. And once a moment passes, the next one is never the same. That's why the ability to stay present is more valuable than any technique, because presence allows you to catch what others miss, to feel what others overlook, to move when others hesitate. And hesitation is the only thing standing between almost and something real. But here's the deeper truth. Even when everything aligns, even when the moment is clear, even when the energy is there, nothing happens unless you step into it. Not aggressively, not forcefully, but naturally. A small shift forward, a slight closing of distance, a continuation of the connection instead of breaking it. That's all it takes. Not a leap, not a risk, just a step. Because attraction doesn't grow through sudden moves. It grows through consistent alignment, step by step, moment by moment, until something that started quietly becomes undeniable. And when you understand this, really understand it, something changes permanently. You stop chasing clarity, you stop needing confirmation, because you can see it, feel it, recognize it in real time. And once you reach that level, interactions stop feeling uncertain. They stop feeling confusing, because you're no longer guessing, you're responding. And there's a difference. Guessing comes from doubt. Response comes from awareness. And awareness is what gives you control. Not control over her, but control over yourself, over your timing, your presence, your ability to stay grounded when everything else feels uncertain. And that is where real confidence comes from. Not from knowing what will happen, but from knowing you'll recognize it when it does. Because the moment will come again, quietly, unexpectedly, just like before. A pause, a look, a shift in energy. And when it does, you won't question it. You won't hesitate. You'll feel it, and you'll meet it exactly where it exists.